30 years ago in 1994, the band Machines of Loving Grace drilled a hole in a guitar, stuck a rope through it, and then chucked it off a cliff at the end of a guitar solo, before dragging it back up again, all just to create a really unique sound. Now, this is a sound that they didn't actually end up using anywhere on the record, as they couldn't find anywhere that it fitted perfectly, but it's still amazing that such sonic pursuits are possible. As soon as you start looking into your own favourite records and songs, so many incredible stories about the recording process of them come to light. These are stories that are not only awesome to hear, but they can indeed inspire you in your own work. Oh no, I'm sorry baby, I didn't mean that. No, I wasn't thinking when I said it, I'd never throw you off a cliff. Before the advent of recorded sound had really taken off, it wasn't uncommon for a person to go through their entire lifetime only hearing their favourite piece of music a handful of times. This is largely because if you wanted to hear a specific piece of music, you were only really going to hear it in a live setting, which was only really achievable if you had the wealth to back it up. A model that Ticketmaster still follows to this day. Recording has not only allowed listeners to summon up any music they want from these devices inside of our pockets, but it's also allowed artists to experiment with recording sounds in different ways. So without further ado, let's jump into the rabbit hole of sound and explore some of my favourite recording studio stories. Leave a comment if these stories remind you of any other recording studio stories, and please subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the video. 1. Spoonman by Soundgarden. Spoonman by Soundgarden is a song I've listened to hundreds of times, so I felt like an idiot when I realised that one of the key instruments in the piece is spoons. Be warned, the footage that I'm about to show you will forever change how you hear the song Spoonman by Soundgarden. This is literally footage from the Super Unknown recording sessions, and it is fantastic. Michael Beinhorn recollects how Spoonman was the first single off Super Unknown that he produced with Soundgarden. The song was written about a street performer named Artis, and for those who knew him, he was a living legend. Beinhorn tells the story of how Artis, quote, showed up at the studio with what looked like an oversized bedroll. He brought it into the recording area, set it on the floor, and opened it. Inside was an extensive collection of battered spoons along with some bells and many flat pieces of metal of various sizes and shapes. Beinhorn continues saying, from the moment the track began, Artis began grabbing spoons, odd bits of ringing metal, and anything else he could find in that bedroll of his, and slapped them against his bare skin as hard and fast as he could. This guy was literally beating the shit out of himself with these bits of metal at almost blinding speed, running them up and down his body whilst playing these complex rhythmic subdivisions, all executed with preternaturally perfect timing. Apparently, Artis ended his performance by trying to sell a book of his acid-induced musings to the band and recording engineers, like any good street performer should. Interestingly, this isn't the first intermingling of grunge and kitchen utensils. Pearl Jam's seminal record 10 includes the song Oceans, which has Tim Palmer playing a fire extinguisher and a pepper shaker. The fire extinguisher provided a metallic drum sound, whilst the pepper shaker provided a shaker sound. However, none of these guys were the first to use special sound effects in their music. 2. Yellow Submarine. Carrying on with the guys who are most commonly associated with thinking outside the box in the recording studio. Yellow Submarine was recorded in just 5 takes at Abbey Road Studio 2 in 1966. However, special sound effects were added to the song at a later date. George Martin brought in various objects, which included chains, a ship's bell, tap dancing mats, whistles, a tin bath filled with water, wind and thunderstorm machines, as well as a cash register, which was later used on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon track Money. Lennon blew through a straw into a pan of water to create a bubbling sound effect, whilst Lennon and McCartney spoke through tin cans to create the sound effect of the captain's orders. Sound effects in music have been used in varying approaches since, including in contemporary classical music such as the Water Concerto, and the Typewriter Concerto. We see this technique used by modern bands such as Superorganism, and classics such as Michael Jackson's Thriller and Nirvana's Drain You. But whilst we're on the topic of Yellow Submarine, there is another awesome story about the brass band in it. Geoff Emerick tells the story about how Abbey Road Studios used to keep stock brass band recordings in their library. They took a Sousa march, chopped the tape up into pieces, threw it up in the air, and then rearranged it in the order of which it landed. Emmerich says that they spliced the tape, quote, backwards and forwards, whatever way they ended up. And when we played it, I had put them back almost in the same order that they were to begin with. I actually had to fade out the last note because of the copyright, which is a trick I'm totally not doing for this YouTube video. 3. Something in the Way, Nirvana. The final track on Nirvana's album Nevermind is the mournful Something in the Way, which Butch Vig described as the hardest song to record on the album. But it has a pretty awesome story about Cobain's vocals on the track. After multiple attempts at recording it, Kurt Cobain found himself unhappy with the tonal qualities of his voice on the song, never being able to find the right mood. He left the main recording room, went into the control room lying on his back on the sofa, and began playing the guitar, saying to Butch Vig, "It needs to sound like this," barely emitting a whisper. Butch Vig ran around the room, turning off the fans and anything making a noise they didn't want in the recording, held his breath, and watched Cobain finish the take. Butch Vig described Cobain's sound as so quiet, yet so powerful, and very mournful, and very quiet. Because the track was recorded off-grid to no click track, Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic had to lay down the drums and bass bar by bar to try and keep it in time. Not only this, but Novoselic on bass and Kirk Canning, the cellist they brought in, had to detune their instruments to try and match Kurt Cobain's wonky 5-string guitar. The idea of having to remain as quiet as possible in the recording studio reminds me of the end of A Day in the Life by the Beatles, where the final E major piano chord rings out for an unnaturally long 40 seconds. As the piano sound naturally faded out around the room, they turned the recording gain up to pick up every single detail of it, which meant that everyone in the live room had to be deadly silent for any noise would get picked up. This included pretty much holding their breath for the whole time. 4. Kate Bush, The Dreaming. The Dreaming was Kate Bush's 4th album and the first one produced entirely by Bush herself. In 1984, 2 years after the record's release, she said, quote, "The main thing I heard was uncommercial, the label that the record company put on it. But for an uncommercial record to go straight in at number 3 in the charts seems ironic to me." Queen Behavior. Her engineer Nick Launay tells the story how, quote, "In her wonderfully high voice, having consumed lots of hashish and chocolate during that day, she asked for the drums to sound like distant cannons." Again, Queen Behavior. The band The Jam, who had been recording in the same studio recently, had been using sheets of corrugated iron around the drum kit to make it sound like it was recorded in a garage. Apparently, they weren't aware that they didn't have to pay for a big, fancy, expensive recording studio and could have literally recorded it in a garage. Bush and Launay used these same sheets of corrugated iron to create a giant tunnel with microphones placed all the way down them. Nick Launay said, quote, "It didn't sound as magnificent as I hoped, but it was weird, and it was weird enough to be good. Weird enough to be good is the most 1980s thing I've ever heard. However, this wasn't the first time that drums appeared on a record sounding cavernous." Enter number 5, When the Levee Breaks, Led Zeppelin. When Zeppelin wanted to record their 4th record, they wanted a live-in situation where they could, quote, "have a cup of tea and wander around the garden and go in and do what we had to do." Where what they had to do was create some of the most iconic music in rock and roll history. They settled on the now infamous Headley Grange in Hampshire and used the Rolling Stones mobile recording studio, which is a studio inside of a truck commissioned by the Rolling Stones when they wanted to record at Mick Jagger's house rather than stick to the real-world schedule of recording in a studio. This studio was used for most of Led Zeppelin's 3rd and 4th albums. In the 2008 film It Might Get Loud, Jimmy Page, Jack White, and... no. That can't be right. No, because surely you'd get someone in the same caliber as the other 2 guitarists. Doesn't really make sense. Anyway, in the 2008 film It Might Get Loud, Jimmy Page revisits Headley Grange for the first time in 40 years, and he recollects the story of how John Bonham ordered a new drum kit, and upon its arrival his tech manager set it up in the entrance hallway, which just so happened to be at the bottom of a now iconic staircase. So when John Bonham hopped on the drum kit and started playing, it created this enormous noise. They dangled microphones from the top of the stairwell whilst John Bonham laid down this now iconic groove. Some of the tape was slowed down to give it even more of a sludgy feeling, as well as delay being added artificially afterwards. It truly was a staircase to heaven. There are so many other techniques that we could discuss here, but here are just 5 of my favourite that I wanted to talk about in this video. If any of these awesome techniques remind you of other recording studio stories that you've heard, please let me know in the comments down below, as I'd love to hear them. And if you've made it this far, you might as well click the subscribe button and the like button, as that really does help me out. Thanks so much for watching, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.